Hey there, so I put together a short video just showing some mobility exercises, focusing mainly on hips and spine. So I'll talk you through as you're watching the video. These first few drills are just focused on mainly getting into a good squatting position. So you can see sitting back into the squat, keeping some weight in the hands, just rocking backwards and forwards, working on some ankle range, working on a bit of hip range, and just allowing the spine to curve and allowing everything to be nice and loose and fluid and relaxed. If you struggle getting into these kind of positions, putting some weight underneath your heels or weight plates underneath your heels will help make it easier to sit into a low squat position. So just working on some adductor flexibility now and some hip external rotation, just using the elbows and the arms to push the knees outwards, and experiment with different foot widths when you're doing these kind of drills as well. Taking the feet out into different positions can feel easier and more difficult for the hips. Rocking the weight forward onto the hands helps you give it extra leverage as you're pushing the knees out. Looking at some spinal rotations as well, so just hang on to your opposite ankle. So using the left hand, hang on to the right ankle. It uses an anchor, it provides an anchor point for which you can then rotate the spine around. Just having a look at some hip flexion drills, so both in standing there with a little stretch through the hamstrings and then sitting into a nice low position. Notice pushing the knees outside the elbows, start to encourage good alignment through the knees into that low squat position, and also trying to keep the spine nice and straight as well as you're going through. These are some drills that do work well for squatting and all lower body movements, but specifically looking at hinging and lunging. So you notice I just moved my pelvis there at the beginning, so just tucking the pelvis underneath gives you more stretch through the hip flexors. And then just gently moving forwards, trying to keep the torso nice and upright so that the extension is coming from my hip rather than extending through my lower back or leaning my chest forwards too much. So stay nice and upright throughout. So just looking into a modified pigeon stretch, like a yoga move. Just tend to find that sitting across into the hip, rocking side to side, gives a good glute stretch. Once you've warmed up, you can then slide the leg back into pigeon, and then just moving the chest up and down will then lengthen through the glute and give you more and less stretch. So nice and dynamic, all of these movements, just moving in and out, not holding for long periods of time. Nice to use for warm-ups before your workouts. Some little lateral reaches, again, they're just going to pull on the glutes and involve the lats and the spine in those exercises. This is mainly having a look at adductors. Okay, so just stretching through the inside of the thigh as you sit back towards the heel. I'm going to play around with the spine in a minute. There you go, just pushing up through the spine and then dipping down. So when you dip down, the pelvis goes into an anterior tilt. This provides a little bit more stretch. And just notice the position of my foot as well. So my foot is nice and flat on the ground, so this lengthens the adductors and all down the inside of the leg a little bit more. Using the ankle there for leverage to pull myself into that position, and there as well, just using that inside left arm against my leg so that I can anchor myself in order to get a bit more reach and rotation through the chest and spine. Here I've used a bench just to modify some of the stretches. So I'm looking at hip flexors mainly here, using the hands to hang on to keep my weight nice and stable as I sink the back knee down towards the ground, keeping my body nice and upright, and then leaning forwards to try and stretch, try and create some dorsiflexion, stretch through the calf, open up the mobility through the ankle as well. You can try in this position just moving the back leg backwards and forwards like that, so just moving through the ankle. Tends to be as you push the heel backwards you get more stretch through the hip flexor, but try and keep the rest of the body nice and straight and stable. If you can't get your knee all the way down to the ground in those as well, you can use a yoga block or a step underneath. just to change the height of that exercise, modify it to fit your mobility. Here again, just pulling underneath the bench so that it makes it easier for me to reach over the top. Just a modified version of the stretch did a minute ago on the ground. So again, keeping the foot flat, as you can see there, just rolling the foot, and then also a bit more of a hamstring stretch with the toes pointing up towards the ceiling. So I can do either stretch in this position and rotate between one stretch and another. This is then a modification of the pigeon stretch that we did on the floor, or that I did on the floor. And just looking at rotating the body around the hip joint to create a bit more of a stretch. And also reaches as well, so in the same way as once you've warmed up through the pigeon, you then lower the body down. Same thing happens here, just involving the spine, moving around the hips. And then some little reaches at the end as well. Just reaching down, trying out different angles, different variations within the stretch, just finding where the resistance is, and then moving into that resistance, trying to increase the range of movement. If you struggle to get if that's too much of a stretch, I tend to find that bringing the bench onto a bit of an angle makes those stretches somewhat easier. Also, if you get any kind of knee pain when you're doing those that modified pigeon, then this is a good way of reducing the torsion through the knee as well. And I think I'm going to find just a yoga block, again just to demonstrate, just putting that underneath the knee, just in case range of movement is an issue. So it actually limits how low that back knee goes and makes things a bit more comfortable, so I can take on either more advanced reaches, reach further into those stretches, or just make it easier for me to be able to stretch the hip.